I want to introduce Sandra. We're so happy you're here with us, Sandra. So Sandra is the founder of Everyday Feminism and Rebecoming Human. And she's going to share some stories and insights from her own journey in using the practice to help her heal from internalized oppression and co-create a more liberating future with others, with all of us, with our community. So Sandra, thank you so much. I look forward to hearing what you have to offer.
Thank you, Nomi, for the introduction and for inviting me into talking and sharing with the Earthholder Sangha. And I would like to just start out with what I want to talk about today is how our attachment to being a good person can actually get in the way of us engaging in deep intersectional environmental earth justice work. And that includes being able to look at the ways that we have internalized white supremacy in particular, and how those two of the harm that we do to the earth and the harm we do to people of color is actually really intertwined with each other. And I want to recognize that it can be a really difficult conversation to have because we don't want white supremacy to exist in the world. And I think there's been a lot of, there's kind of the feeling that we've entered at least prior to Trump, especially with the presidency of Obama, there was this sense of maybe we transcended race and racism and white supremacy and we become post-racial. And then with the election of Trump and a lot of the racist policies that he's supported, promoted, and enacted, it became really clear for a lot, I think particularly for white folks, of how actually pervasive racism and white supremacy is in our society, a truth that for a lot of people of color, that's been the lives that we've led. And at the same time, a lot of people of color have also internalized white supremacy and wanting to remain ignorant of how prevalent it is, because it's really violent. It's really violent, both not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually and socially. And so I wanted to just name that this can be a very difficult conversation for a lot of folks who are new to having this conversation. And I think there's a particular dynamic for white folks who are starting to understand that white supremacy is real, to understand what does that even mean for them as a white person, because that's part of the awakening process, to understand yourself as part of a group of people that you may not want to associate with because of how whiteness is connected to white supremacy. And so I want to share, so that's kind of, it's just a bit of some things I want to just kind of name as part of the container for this conversation. And for folks to really, what I'm going to be unpacking a bit is that our attachment to being a good person, which means oftentimes a good and non-racist person, can actually make it easier for us to enable white supremacy to continue unchecked. And so if you're feeling this conversation, that feeling activated around me talking about white supremacy, then I really invite you to notice that and look deeply at what's underneath that. Because for me, as Nomi shared, my website, my work is called Rebecoming Human. And I believe that we are inherently whole, interconnected of nature, and that we have been torn away from these truths by systemic oppression. And that one of the things that white supremacy did to us is that it made people of color less than, it made us inferior, and then it made people of European descent and those who can pass as white be superior than, be better than, and that both are actually dehumanizing. And they're dehumanizing emotionally and spiritually, and it gave benefits, unearned benefits in the form of privileges to white folks while marginalizing people of color. So wanting to hold all those different truths. And so I want to share one of my story about, well, not story, I want to share a bit about how I even coming into this conversation though. And I come into this conversation as a displaced person on colonized lands. I was born and raised in the United States, and my family came over from Korea. And my family is actually from both what is now North and South Korea, from the Korean Peninsula. But then what happened is that Japan had colonized the Korean Peninsula back during my great-grandparents' time. And then after the World War II was over and Japan lost, they had to give up their colonies. This was during the time of the Cold War. And so they split up. So the world powers decided that to split up the Korean Peninsula, and the then USSR took over the North Korea, what became North Korea, and then the US took over with South Korea to quote unquote help us develop, even though we had been one country for thousands of years. And so, and in the context of that, of post-war, post-colonization, post-poverty, of Reconstruction and military dictatorships, my family came to the United States in the 70s. And so what does this mean as a person whose family has been deeply impacted by the larger systemic oppression, the wars that have just played out on our land, and then being able to come into this country to be able to live in a way that was impossible at the time in Korea, that was only made available because of the violence that had been done here in this country and continues to, from colonization, because Indigenous people are very much still here, from the ways that this country was also built on slavery and segregation, exploitation of free and cheap labor. And so really, so understanding that I don't get to exist as just an individual, where if I'm just an individual, I get to just like do my best and have really good intentions and do what I can, you know, to be nice and kind to folks, which is great in of itself. But without understanding the history, the fact that I actually stand in the continuum of the history of my peoples, which is the history of Korea and the history of the United States, then I'm really actually going to be unconsciously causing harm. And I think that's really hard for people to grapple with. Because what privilege does is that it says that you don't know what you don't know. And a lot of my work is around helping people become conscious of the things they have been unconscious, that they were even unconscious about. And so for me, you know, it's been a process of understanding what is my relationship to the land as somebody whose family is so recently arrived to this country. And actually, what does it mean, in addition to Indigenous justice and sovereignty rights, what does it mean for me to be in caring, responsible relationship with the land, if we want to look at that? And as a displaced person on colonized lands, you know, my body doesn't know what to do here. My body knows more what to do in Korea, but it's like, it's trying to understand its place right now without having connection to the land, in part because I live in the city, in part because we don't get taught how to be caring to the land. We don't get taught, it's not modeled to us, how do we stay connected to the spirit of the land, that we have a spirit inside of us. And for me, this is all actually part of the larger dynamic of systemic oppression, where, you know, part of the deal with white supremacy and exploitative capitalism is that it wanted to reduce us into bodies to produce work, and reduce us into bodies that produced workers who would then produce work and profit for other folks. And then we could get some scraps, essentially. And so it really made us into mechanical machines, essentially. Turns us to robots, and I would say it turned us into work zombies. So if we're actually looking at our relationship to the land and to the level of devastating harm that is happening to the earth, then if we look at it from a place of like more mechanics, of more technical solutions, then we're actually we're not looking deeply at what is the source cause of this widespread harm that is happening, that we are causing, facilitating, and ignoring as human beings. We actually need to look at the fact that we are no longer one with the earth, with the land and the sea, like in the air. Like we just see ourselves actually as separate. And I believe that when we talk about interbeing, it's not just between humans. It's also between all beings. When I mean all beings, I mean like non-human beings, animals, plants, minerals, the wind. I think that there is a way that we are coexisting and impacting each other, whether that's on a physical, emotional, spiritual level, that there's ways that we're interacting and impacting each other because because of interbeingness. And if we don't actually return to that original connection, then then our actually ability to address ecological crisis and what I call climate chaos versus climate change, that is severely limited. We're actually just going to be replicating more of the same and trying to quote unquote solve the problem. And so I wanted to share a story that I heard in a book that I read to help connect these two even more. So I was reading, what book was it? I think it was Caliban and the Witch by Silvia Federici. And it was talking about how one of the things that when European colonizers came over to Turtle Island is that they would see how there wasn't really private property. There's a lot more freedom for women and children than they are used to. And so they set about teaching indigenous men to dominate and control women and their sexuality, and as well as the children, and to physically punish them. And that was necessary in order to get them to understand how to have ownership, which was also necessary. So in order for them to understand they could own land. And so these connections between domination, violence to human beings is very strongly also correlated with the violence and domination that we do to the earth. And for me, in knowing that these constructs that we have around private property, around race, around work, these are actually all social constructs that aren't natural to us and really interfere with our ability to be deeply interconnected with each other, actually. We're no longer engaging as human to human. We are actually trying to get more work out of folks. I often say that white supremacy requires that white people be good or else they're seen as monsters, and that patriarchy requires men to be right or they're worthless. And exploitative capitalism requires people to be workers or else they're worthless. They have no value. And so for me, even for folks who don't have those identities, we've all grown up in this environment and we've all internalized these ways of thinking, actually, to different degrees and in different ways, and we benefit in different ways. But this is the air that we breathe, unfortunately, and it's quite toxic. And so folks who don't have those identities, who have marginalized identities, so as a person of color, I have both heard all the toxic messages around people of color and white folks, and I have my own experience and my own history and my own cultures different from whiteness to help support me in pushing back, help support me in seeing through the lies of those messages. And I think what's really hard for folks who have those privileged identities is that the whole world is constructed to keep you ignorant. And so there's a big waking up period, and Earthholder Sangha is also part of the process of trying to help people wake up to both the injustice happening to the earth, but also to happening to people, women, people of color, and other marginalized identities. And so understanding that if we are attached to being a good person, to being right, to working in order to have worth, that actually gets in the way of us being in alignment with our desire for justice and for healing. And so something I want to share, an example of this is, as I used to run Everyday Feminism, where we had a team of folks and I was the leader. And for me, it was very important to be a really supportive, affirming leader and manager, having worked at so many places that are really dehumanizing at work. And so we had a really beautiful culture. This was in the very beginning where we weren't really making any money. I was getting paid. There was very little money. And so we had people who worked for free as interns. And so we invested a lot in them, invested a lot in developing culture and team dynamics where they really learned a tremendous amount in appreciation for their work that they were offering for free. And one of the people came to a point where we were able to actually pay her, and she became an independent contractor. And then in time, we were able to have enough money to hire somebody, and she did not fit that role. And so I went to her and said, now we're able to hire somebody, and like, this is the role. And so that means that we actually are going to we're going to get rid of your independent contractor role and have that work be part of this staff role, which you're welcome to apply to if you wanted. But I wasn't going to I wasn't going to hire her directly because it actually wasn't a fully appropriate fit. And so I talked with her. I was like, it's really hard to be told that your position is no longer wanted. And I just wanted to check in with you and see how you're doing about that. And so at that time, she was like, that's so fine. I get it. That makes sense. But then she came back later and she was like, you know what? I feel like I got played, honestly. And I was like, okay. And she sent out an email. So I had a little time to process that. Because at first my reaction was like, I did all these things to try to make sure that you are taken care of. And I had a strong reaction coming from a place of like, I am doing my best to be a really good manager to you in this really difficult situation. And so I got angry and defensive actually about her reaction. And thankfully I have in my practice, which I was able to pause and be like, okay, so where is this coming from? And for me, it was actually my attachment to being a good manager. I so much wanted to be a good manager that it made me want to roll over her feelings and experiences in order to assert that I was a good manager. And so thankfully, like I said, I was able to notice it, to name it. So I was mindful of my attachment to being a good manager that was keeping me from being present to what she was experiencing. And it was actually keeping me from being present to my own deeper reality, right? But once I was able to pause and shift and become mindful, I was like, oh, this is where it's coming from. Okay. And I was able to let it go. And then go to her and be like, okay, I hear that you feel like you got played. Can you tell me more? And so I heard her out. I was like, that makes sense. And it was, mainly about like she had taken a bit of a lower rate before because we couldn't pay that much. But now that we could pay more, we were going to pay somebody else at higher rate. And so we talked it through. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense. You were being generous with us and took a chance with us and took a lower pay rate. So we're going to pay you the equivalent back wages, which is completely legally unnecessary, right? And to be in integrity with our values and to treat each other as real human beings, I was going to do something that was technically not required. She was, because that is what it means, I think, to be together, deeply together as human beings, actually. And so it was with this that, so this is one example of how I think when we get attached to doing things the right way or to be good, or we have to do work, we have to go in order to be acceptable, then we need to pause and look, actually, what is behind that? Where does that come from? Because I think we're traumatically attached to actually supporting systemic oppression. We think that we have to do these things in order to be okay, because that's the way the world is structured, actually. If you actually got to take the time to rest as much as you actually needed to, if you were able to be fully self-expressed in your family, with your friends and work about the environment, about white supremacy, about patriarchy, like the world is not structured to support those conversations, to support those actions, actually. And there's a growing number of people who do want to do that differently. And so, like, for example, the Sangha, and what it requires us to do is to look at where we get caught, though. Where we get caught at, we don't want to look at the pain. We don't want to look at the violence. We don't want to look at the interconnection between, because when we talk about interbeing, that's also interbeing of systemic oppression, also known as intersectionality, right? That these are all interconnected and do all water each other, actually. But that we can choose with mindfulness how to shift what we water, right? And so, but that requires us to become present to what is first and foremost, which is a lot of ignorance. And so as we wake up, there is what I call, it's like when you've been put into, when your foot falls asleep because you were put into a bad position, unnatural position, the blood gets cut off to your foot. Well, when you start moving, it hurts a whole lot. And if it didn't hurt, then you'd be even more trouble, actually, because that means the blood was so cut off from your foot that it isn't even hurting that the blood's going back. But the fact that you're actually feeling some pain means that blood is going back to where it needs to, and you need to move gingerly. You need to move slowly and patiently with yourself, or else it's just going to hurt more. And that's what I actually recommend to folks who are currently more waking up to the existence of systemic oppression and the deep pervasive nature of it, is that it hurts. There's no way around it. To bear witness the violence of systemic oppression that people are dealing with every single day is painful. There's no way around that. But if you choose to go be like, I don't want to feel this pain, so you're going to contort yourself back into that position where you get to numb out, then things will get worse for you, actually. Because what happens when you repress your own pain? You repress also your joy. Your emotional container, your ability to be mindful of your feelings, whether that's pain or joy, it's the same container. So if you reject and run away from pain, you also have made your emotional container be that much smaller, so you don't feel as much joy either. But if you can turn toward that pain, and you find that difficult, you can actually then turn toward joy and playfulness. That's a big part of this tradition, is to actually be very, embrace and play and be mindful of that joy and peace within us, to then be able to turn toward the pain with a bigger container. So the pain has not changed, but your container, your ability to hold it has grown. And I have, in my training, there's times when during my trainings, there was yet another police shooting of an unarmed Black person. And so what we did was, there was a lot of heaviness, there was a lot of grief and pain in the room. It was virtual too, but there was a lot of pain there. And so we did, instead of diving into that pain, I had them think of the moment recently where they felt a lot of laughter, a lot of connection. And then we became present to how that was feeling in our bodies. And then I brought them back to their grief and pain. It was still there, but they had much more spaciousness around it. They weren't so stuck and filled because their container had grown. Their grief and pain was still the same size, but it no longer filled the entire container because the container was now bigger. And that's what this practice can allow for us to do, but only if we use it to actually return to the pain and the compassion, and allow the compassion to generate from that pain, right? A lot of folks use these practices to distract, actually. People use these practices to calm down, self-soothe, de-stress, relax, which is great, and that's not the end game. The end game is not to self-soothe. It's to actually build our capacity to be with more and more in the world, so that we can take care of all in the world, so that we can alleviate suffering and be in touch with the natural joy that is within us and each of us. And so I really encourage folks to if they want to shy away from something, to look deeply at, why do they want to shy away from that? What's underneath that? And to be gentle with yourself in that process. Gentle patience and humble curiosity is actually, and going slowly and doing it together with other people, that's actually what's going to save us. So I will stop there for now. Thank you for listening. Sandra bowing out. I think there is so much violence that happens in our attempts to stop the violence in our social justice and social change spaces. There's that quote by Audre Lorde that the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. And I think, and people use that quote quite a lot, and I don't think they actually even know what the master's tools is oftentimes, though. This is where the whole being unconscious of what you're unconscious about is really destroying our ability to actually be the people we want to be in the world. And in large part because we're unconscious of the cosmology that we got taught by white supremacy, by exploited capitalism and patriarchy in colonization, is that there is no cosmology. It's mechanical. We live in a mechanical world. The only thing that exists is like physical things. The only thing that matters are human beings. And the only thing worth doing is to work. Everything else is in service of our ability to work. And work only things that are paid by the market. The market has to have value for them. And so the thing that I find is that because there is such a foundational basics missing with this, that there's a lot of replication of the harm in our dynamics, which is why I personally, I am Buddhist and have been for over a decade. It's been a big part of my own healing journey and spiritual journey, obviously. But part of the reason why I do show up to talk here and other places is because I think that there's so much potential in spiritual communities. And somebody was also asking about in the chat box about how white supremacy is violent spiritually and emotionally as well as physically, especially within the context of this tradition of both being a heritage Buddhist and being engaged Buddhism, and how that can really offer a different cosmology and a different way of being with what is happening, the violence in the world, and a different way of showing up. And I think it's not a coincidence that most of the people I know who have a much more healing and grounded way of gauging social justice work have Buddhist practices. They often do. And they're often alone in the way that they're merging the two together, actually. And so I think spaces like Earth Holder and Arise and whatnot has a lot of potential to create spaces for folks to bring the two together. And I think we don't really talk about the cosmology of Buddhism in the United States because I think there's trauma from conservative Christian families and churches. I think there is the unconscious that we are taught to reject that which is spiritual. Even in spiritual communities, we try to have a really secular Buddhism in the United States because of the way spiritualities and religions are tied together, and that spiritually in of itself is poo-pooed upon as not being real. And so, which is all, as I said, a manifestation of systemic oppression. So I think it can be really hard to have a Buddhist Sangha that actually can hold a cosmology that actually holds the existence of all beings and is grounded in lineage and ancestors. But that's actually what the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition does. It actually does do that. I think it's up to individual sanghas and practitioners about how much they want to engage in that, because that is their own healing and trauma that's happening around the things that make it want them to reject stuff. But the practice is all about not having aversions and not having cravings, and like looking to the things that lead to us having cravings and aversions, including around our Buddhism, right? And so I think until we can, the work, to take another point, is that I find that so much of this work is that there's such a severe lack of belonging that most people feel. They feel because white supremacy took people of European descent and took them away from their their histories, and try to give them just white supremacy as their culture. And then for people of color, it also said that was all bad. That's different. That's, that's uncivilized and whatnot. And so try to be like fit into this box, and which nobody is flourishing in, you know? Trump won the game of white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. He won the game. He became the single most powerful person in the world. He's doing miserably. He is not good, right? And so, and he has deep, deep, deep feelings of not belonging and not being loved. You can tell by the way he acts, actually, everything he does, because he feels inherently something's wrong with him. So he's constantly trying to make everybody tell him that how wonderful he is. And so for me, and I was talking with just a bunch of my friends who are all radical people of color healers, activist healers, about our secure attachment. So if folks are interested in attachment theory, I won't go into it right now, but basically I only have secure attachment. I only feel like I belong because my relationship to spirit. You know, it's like family, friends, we know it's rough. It's rough as a human being with all this level. We have all the seeds within us that have been watered for generations, and a lot of seeds of trauma, as well as a lot of seeds of love. We got a lot of trauma that we don't know how to take care of. And so for me, my journey into deeper spirituality that came accessible to me because of the healing, right? It allowed me to develop a secure attachment with spirit, to know that I truly had Buddha nature. Like I believe, I like really, really viscerally believe in my Buddha nature, the Buddha nature of all peoples and all beings, right? Like that is just like really core to how I move through the world. And that is just not there for most people because they have so much attachment issues. And attachment issues feels like almost a light word for the lack of belonging that most people feel. And like I said, I believe that we're naturally creative, whole, interconnected of nature beings, and systemic oppression taught us otherwise. And so in the ways that we can come back to, I think that's why so much is possible if we can create the space. But I think spiritual communities need to create the space and become much more lean in, like co-create the space between people of spiritual liberation and social liberation, so that this folks can feel like they belong in that space. And just be FYI, it looks really different. It just looks really different than how most spaces are constructed now. So that's the work. That's just the work. How do we develop, nurture deep togetherness? That's the work. Sandra bowing out. How to be with the pain that we want to run away from. And I think it's important to look at the ways that we've been taught to be with our pain, which is to not. It's to pretend it doesn't exist, to minimize it, suppress it. It's to make other people wrong for it or make ourselves wrong for feeling it, to blame other people. It's to try to change the situation quickly and thinking that if we just do that thing, it'll make the pain go away. So we end up becoming really coercive, actually. And so I call this like the 3 C's of dehumanization, that we crush our realities or realities of other people, that we condemn people, including ourselves, judge, shame, blame, throw them off the island, that we coerce, control people, including ourselves, to just get over it, just move on, or just do something, just to act, or just make somebody else agree with us and make them do something different. And so these are the ways that we've been taught to be with our pains, which is to not be with them, actually. And so it's actually noticing when we're doing those things first. These are the red flags that are telling us that something, that like this desire, and I would say these are dehumanizing strategies, that this desire to crush, condemn, and control are coming from somewhere. And so to pause and notice that, pause, and just, and you know, Thich Nhat Hanh talks about engaging in some sort of physical mindfulness practice, right? I would call it grounding practice, whether that's breathing, whether that's walking, whether that's feeling the sun on our skin, whether that's doing something, some sort of physically mindful activity that helps us return back to our bodies, to more fully being in our bodies. And that helps create some sense of spaciousness. And that's why people like to engage in practice, right? Because it does help them relax a bit. It helps them feel a little more grounded, a little more spacious. But once again, if we stop there, then we actually never take care of the underlying pain that led us to need to reground in the first place. So after we stop, we reground in our bodies, we then need to actually turn toward that pain and hold space for it and just acknowledge it and notice it as like, I feel pain, like I feel anger, I feel frustration, I feel guilty that I feel guilty, right? So we're just noticing how we are. And I feel bad that I feel bad because like I'm blank privileged, right? Like, whatever, fill in the blank for yourself, right? Or it may be like, I feel overwhelmed by the pain. I'm overwhelmed by how overwhelmed I feel, right? And so you're just noticing the physical sensation of that pain in your body and just breathing with it. You're not trying to do anything with it. You're not trying to change it. You're not trying to make it go away. You're not trying to blame it on other people outside of yourself. You're really just noticing the sensation of the pain in your body, right? And I want to be mindful of the fact that actually could be triggering for some folks and have people go actually into a spiraling out. So I want folks to also know that this is an invitation, that you need to also move into your pain mindfully of your own limitations, and that you don't need to go diving head first and to explore all the deep depths of everything in your first go around. This is a muscle memory that we need to be building up, and you need to be listening to yourself, and you're like, no, that's too much. And so then you can reground in your body, and whether that's, so feel your feet as you walk, feel the sun on your skin, notice your belly moving in and out as you breathe, something to help you pull out of your pain. Because your consciousness is what actually turns on and off how much shows up for you in this when you're practicing in this way. So just want to say that, like, when we move toward pain, we have to be mindful of how far we go and to not force ourselves to move into pain that will actually be re-traumatizing to us. So moving to gentle patience and humble curiosity. And so, but if you are ready, as you move gently into that pain, you can just notice sensation in your body and just breathe with it and just be with it. Like literally breathe and be with it. And I would say, we notice, we acknowledge, and then we affirm. And so I do this practice. If you go to my website, sandrakim.com, there's Tea Time with Sandra. I've actually recently put that on pause, but there's all the old videos where I guide people through practices doing this, of being with the pain and being like, I see you, you matter, I care, and variations on that depending on where you are with that pain. And so just being with it. We're not trying to change anything, do anything with it. We're just being with it really mindfully. And then the energy of mindfulness will transform it, actually. It'll transform from being an unpleasant feeling into a neutral feeling, actually. So it's still there, but there's like spaciousness around it, actually. It stops from being such a emotionally charged, we can't do anything around it, and it shifts into actually, like, you can feel the pain, but it's neutral's perhaps not the best word, but there's more spaciousness around it. It's not charged anymore. And I can actually guide people through a practice right now if folks are interested. But I also am conscious we have a certain time flow in doing things. So, but knowing that the thing that you need to switch from is the neurotic thinking. When your mind is going like this, you need to shift into sensing it in your body, actually. And then you just be with it, and that's your only job, is to be with it mindfully, sensing the physical sensation in your body and giving it some caring affirmations. I care, you matter, stuff like that. I see you, you're here, that's okay, right? You just be proactively mindful and caring with it. And then it will naturally soften up and it will naturally transform itself, and the charge will dissipate so that you have spaciousness to actually take action around it. Sandra bowing out.
So
this is something that I've been on a journey around. And so having tried in some spaces where to introduce it to existing activist spaces, and the ground is so broken around them that it's really hard actually as a single person to do it. And then in some spaces where I was the sole leader, I was able to hold that both with people who wanted to be in both, and so they're consenting to actually be in both, in a space that held both social and spiritual liberation, where I was giving them trainings. But then that's complicated because that makes me the sole leader, and so I don't really do that outside of trainings. And then now what I'm doing is working with other healers who already embody both, who already progressed enough in their journeys that they are both doing social justice work and in a way that is trauma informed, healing engaged, and spiritually grounded, and done in community. And we have been doing that. We know, and so in DC, for example, we have known of each other and are friends to a certain degree, some closer than not, others. And yesterday was actually, I had another meeting with them for us to grow gradually together into something more cohesive so that we could hold a space collectively. Because once again, folks don't know what they don't even know, and they're like, I just have seen so much that the basics are missing in people's ability to notice when they're having a trauma response. And then they act from their trauma response, which then triggers other people's trauma responses. And that's how a lot of this harm and violence happens, is because people don't have basic understanding of what's happening in their brains and bodies. Oftentimes because we have a culture that works too much, is stretched so thin, and says that if you take time for self-care, you're not really down for the cause. Right? And then on top of that, all the economic insecurity that happens in a world where you have to work a job that market decided to pay you a lot of money so that you can have secure housing and food, right? So for where I kind of got off track with that, but the point being, is that really I find that I'm finding the need to just create the space with other folks who already do embody that, and then inviting folks into that space. And that's the thing I'm in process around. And because we have to, I think, swing to the other side of togetherness and just experience it, talk about it, and keep course correcting our way in it, versus I think trying to take this thing that is founded on a lot of dehumanizing dynamics, trying to do it better, instead of trying to like course correct within this like level of broken ground. I'm just like, let's just create a new ground over here with folks who are more there than not. I'm not saying that me and the other folks I'm organizing with, like, we're perfect. We're not Buddhas. Like, we get petty, we get, we get angry and like emotionally charged too. But we have ways of holding ourselves, and we have communities that hold us, relationships that hold us, that like I find most people just don't have. And so finding the people, where that's here in this Sangha or other places, and who already embody that, and that you can mentor each other, you can support each other to develop the solidity enough that then you can hold the space for other folks to enter into. Sandra bowing out.
Yeah, we want to give you the chance, Sandra, to lead us in a closing, maybe a brief resourcing, like you mentioned. And so I'm going to bow out and give you a chance to do a closing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Naomi. Since we only have a little bit of time, I'm going to do a grounding practice, actually, as opposed to a healing practice. But the grounding practice is something that you can lean on in the future when you feel more pain, to help create a little more spaciousness for you to turn toward that pain. So I like for folks to get comfortable, similar to, we're going to be doing guided visualization, so similar to for meditating. I like folks to get comfortable and to close your eyes or have them looking softly downwards. We're just going to do a body scan and then request permission to have the earth support us. And so starting out, we're just going to breathe in, notice the breath coming in, and breathing out, we notice the breath going out. Breathing in, we notice the breath coming in. Breathing out, we notice the breath going out. And we're just going to bring our attention gently to the top of our head, just to notice the sensation there, not trying to change anything, make anything go away. But what is it, the sensations, if any, on the top of our head, the front of our face, the back of our head, our neck, our shoulders, our right arm, our right hand, our left shoulder, left arm, left hand, upper chest, our solar plexus, our lower abdomen, our waist and hips, our right thigh, right calf, right foot, our left thigh, our right calf, our left foot, left calf, and our left foot. And it's just breathing with our entire body, sensing what it's like on our entire right side and our entire left side as we breathe. And breathing in, we notice our entire body. Breathing out, we notice sensation of our skin of our entire body. Breathing in, we notice. Breathing out, we notice. And then bringing our attention back into our feet. We're going to visualize in our mind's eye our feet touching the earth. Feeling the warmth of the earth, the tickle of the grass, the solidity that we stand on. I want you to ask the earth if we can enter and be nourished. If you sense a yes, we'll continue in a minute. If you sense a no, that's okay. You can just notice what it's like to be there, connected physically with the earth. And if you got a yes, I want you to visualize roots going down out of your foot, down into the earth. They're going down and down and down, down and down and down, going down and down and down into the earth. And then you reach water. You go down and down into that water that the earth holds. And then we pull in the water, this nourishing water, up through our left side, up through the left roots, up and up and up, up and up and up. And it enters, the water enters through our left foot, through the roots, through our left leg, up our left side, our torso, our left arm, left side of our neck, left side of our head, over to the right side, down our neck, our right arm, our right torso, down through our right leg, goes back into the ground through our right foot. So round and round the water goes, us receiving up and up through the left side, up and up and up and up, and going down through the right, down and down to the right. In circulation, we receive the love of water, the earth, and we give back to the earth, the water. Just feeling the circulation. Just visualizing as you breathe in, going up, going down, just breathe out. In, out, in, out, in, out. Just notice what it's like to be here, to be nourished by the earth, by the water. To be giving back to the earth and to the water as well. To be in the cycle of nourishment. We thank the earth, the water, our bodies, our breath, for holding us, for nourishing us, for being together with us. We pull up the roots through our feet, up and up and up, up and up and up, back into our bodies, knowing that this connection is available to us when we need it, when we ask, when we're given permission. And then we thank ourselves for taking the time for this, for being here with Mother Earth. Breathing in, we notice the breath coming in. And breathing out, we notice the breath going out. Breathing in, we notice the breath coming in. Breathing out, we notice the breath going out. Breathing in, we open up our eyes. Breathing out, we move a little bit. We get resettled. If you need to stretch, do what you need to come back to this particular here and now. There are many here and nows, but get reoriented to here. I thank you for letting me guide you through that little journey.
Oh, dear Sandra, a deep bow of gratitude to you. So many things you've offered us today. I have about 20 questions, which maybe I'll get to just sit down with you and ask them. It's so beautiful, so skillful, so gentle, so kind. Great gratitude to you for offering your time to us. In our tradition, the practices are often offered freely. And so if you would like to offer generosity to Sandra, she has, her website is sandrakim.com. I assume there's someplace there people can offer a donation to you, or they can email you and find out how to do that. Is that correct, Sandra?
Yeah, apparently it's not working on the website. I have to fix that. So
Okay.
I'll put my PayPal in the chat box.
Okay, great.
But you can, so that's probably the best way.
Okay, and also we invite you to offer generosity to the Earthholder community. And we would love for you to check out our website more fully and offer your dana there, earthholders.org. easy to remember. And when you're there, to look around a little. And in particular, if you're someone who would like to go a little deeper with our community, to click on the Basecamp link. And if that seems like total technical gobbledygook to you, like it does to me, our wonderful Simona, our community coordinator, will help you figure out how to get into that community. And that's where we go a little deeper. So we invite you to join us in whatever way you would like to. And we thank you for being here today. I'm so grateful for all of you. And may you go well. Thank you, Sandra.